what was it that first got you into wrestling to begin with, and then on top of that, when you first got into wrestling, after which, what kind of kept you into wrestling?
All right. So if nobody knows, especially if you're not subscribed to Phil here, I got into wrestling 1987. I was 5 years old. Okay. When I first saw the first pay-per-view, and I'm forgetting the pay-per-view that was around in 87. Thank you, Malcolm. WrestleMania 3, that was my first pay-per-view I saw. And, sorry guys, that was my brother. I saw these individuals grappling, but they were colorful and there were different shades of this and that. They reminded me of live action superheroes in a way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at them like, wow, okay, this is very entertaining and cool. Look at these moves that they're doing, and you know, I saw the Hogan and things like that, Andre the Giant, and I'm like, wow, look how tall this guy is, and you know, and from there, I was hooked. You know, I would constantly watch it just to see what other colorful characters would come out there. You know, seeing Jake the Snake and the Warrior and the Hart Foundation and the Rockers, you know, and Ric Flair at the time, and you know, Jimmy Fly Snuka and the Dragon, and I'm like, oh my God, look at all these cool characters, and I was just like, I was mesmerized by them.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed with them for so long, and then I started to see that there were other friends that I grew up with that were watching it, and so we would talk about it all the time, like, you know, did you see that? And yeah, we saw that. That was great. And once, you know, the era started to change, and we started seeing the changing, so to speak, of the guard in terms of the top wrestler, I was still hooked, you know, because the storyline started to get a little bit more edgier, you know, and a little bit more in depth than what they were going with in the past, and I was still hooked from there. You know, I looked at it not just as entertainment, I look at these guys not as just as entertainment, as athletes, you know, that these guys are putting their bodies on the line nearly 365 days of the year, you know. And I respect that. I respect the hell out of them for doing that, and the techniques that they learn from various trainers, you know, whether you go over to Japan to learn it, or you go down to Mexico to learn it, or wherever you need to go to learn to grapple the art of wrestling. I respect that, and it's hard, and it's not basically in terms and tens of hundreds of guys out there that want to be on the big level, but they're not at the film. So they go to what is quote unquote the independent line, and they go to the indies, and they make a name for themselves in the indies. And so when these guys come up to the big leagues, I know who they already are. Me and my brother, we know who they are. For example, a guy that we're big about is the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. They call him Daniel Bryant now.
Mm-hmm.
We know who he is already. We knew who he was the moment he came in. You know, he's trained with Shawn Michaels and people like that, and you know, and we knew who he was from the get-go, from his days in Ring of Honor and things like that. You know, so we're very happy to see where he is now. You know, so yeah, when it comes to the indie guys, you know, we love it to see them, but then we hate to see what that company may do with them in terms of change them from what they were in the indie circuit, or to have quote unquote a piece of trash commentator just dog them out. And you know who I'm talking about. I hate it, and I know that some people say that then that must mean they're doing their job for you to hate it. No, because I loved Jesse Ventura and the Brain for them being the color commentator or the bad guy commentator for what they brought to the table, but they still entertain me to just like, okay, yeah, I still love this guy no matter what he says about the certain face wrestler. But with Michael Cole, it's like you can tell this guy is being fed that shit, and it pisses me off. So I just keep my mouth shut, especially when I'm watching the weekly shows when he's on it. I just hate it. But yeah, you can tell how this guy just gets fed that shit, and it just pisses me the hell off, so to speak. So that's basically how it kept me. I got into it, and it kept me involved into it. The characters and seeing where it went from, the evolution, basically.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to keep my mind focused on the Michael Cole deal because I wanna address him myself. But before I do, because I know that when I first got into wrestling, I think I saw a wrestling match live before I even seen the one on TV.
Okay.
And that's because my father, he was a big wrestling fan. And there was a place here in Detroit called the Cobo Arena that we used to go to twice a month to check out the original Sheik, not that bald-headed doofus that Hogan wrestled. But,
okay.
And it was almost always the Sheik as a champion and Bobo Brazil as a challenger. And my father was one of those guys that kind of ahead of his time, loved the villain. So consequently, I ended up loving the hero. And then when I got a little older, I noticed things that I used to like but no longer did. Like Bobo Brazil, he was ahead of his time because in that day it was the 70s, and he had been champion once or twice, and he was a black wrestler.
Right.
And when I was coming up at that time, I enjoyed him for what he brought to wrestling until I got a little older, and I started to realize that it seemed like him and every other African American wrestler could only be effective with their heads being hard and had to do these headbutts or cocoa butts. I'm like, and every time a white wrestler did it was like his head hurt. But a black wrestler was like, oh, this doesn't necessarily hurt. So, it kind of put me off a little bit.
Well, you can say that also about any quote-unquote Samoan wrestler as well. The headbutt became very much a trademark to any Samoan wrestler.
Yeah, true.
If you hit them in the head, it don't affect them. A little bit of stereotypical act of Islander or so like that. But yeah, definitely I can see where you're coming from. Like I said, my dad, he was a fan as well. Grew up, watching a lot of people as you just said. Until he got me and I started watching it, and he kept going with it as well. He kind of fell off top of it now, but he still knows some of the wrestlers that me and my brother watch. But yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I didn't know later on, probably around, 77, 78, it looked like wrestling had pretty much died off. You had to have your TV set at a certain angle to where you had to pick up a real obscure station and maybe see a fuzzy version of wrestling up until about 82, 83, and where I could get back into it again. And that's where I found out about one of my favorite wrestlers, where he's one of the very few that could do stuff that was on the racial tip, and I still liked him. And that was Roddy Piper.
Oh yeah.
And Roddy, the Hot Rod, is someone I've been a fan of pretty much his entire career, And Hogan, I never could stand.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't stand him, and there's a little bit of hypocrisy with it because at the time, even though I couldn't stand Hogan, I did like the Ultimate Warrior.
Okay, yeah, I was a fan of the Warrior.
But the problem was they both had they both were about equal in their skill set. They didn't really have that many moves. But I think the reason that the Ultimate Warrior won me over is because of that painted mask he has, and which leads into both of our other loves, which is comics.
Right.
So it kind of reminded me of a superhero-ish kind of thing, which Hogan never reminded me of. Hogan just seemed like the back of a cereal box kind of ad, And I couldn't wait until, and it seemed like the WWF made it a routine thing where different wrestlers would turn on them. And I would love to see somebody turn on Hogan. Because it was just, I have a total blind spot when it comes to him. Because on the one hand, I do know that Hogan had a lot to do in the 80s with giving wrestling a face again, with giving wrestling an identity again. But at the same time, he was such a horrible wrestler that he brought such a lack of credibility to the act of wrestling that I could never respect it myself.
You know, in that regard, I can understand it as well. Like I said, you know, with him, it was more like, you know, he would do maybe 2 or 3 moves, and that was like his moveset. But then, if you watch him in his earlier career, especially when he was over in Japan, this guy used to wrestle, and I'm like, okay, so why are you not doing that now? You know, and like I said, you know, I could barely. It was always the typical, like you said, you wanted to see people turn on him. So when they had him and let's say another one of my favorites, Macho Man Randy Savage, rest in peace. Basically, they were the mega powers, and then you know, Macho turned on him. It was like, you know, oh, you know, you always wanted that, but in a certain specter, you were like, you know, at the time when I was watching it, you know, you were like, you know, you didn't really think of like, well, you know, Hogan's gonna win, you know, but it was always good to see somebody turn on him, and so to speak, when you talk about the Warrior, you know, to see them go at it finally and him beat Hogan for the belt and became a dual champion. He had the Intercontinental belt and he took it from Hogan. It was basically supposed to be the changing of the guard. You know, Hogan was supposed to, you know, he's giving the belt over like, okay, now the ball is in your court, Warrior. Now you run with it. And you figure that would have lasted a lot longer than it did, but it didn't, you know. And I can understand your grief over Hogan and a lot of people's grief over, you know, he was, I've heard guys say, oh, he was bland, he was this, you know, the best thing he did was, he would cut a promo that was good, you know, but when it came to grappling or wrestling, you know, he sucked, you know, he basically sucked, and, you know, I can get that, because, trust me, me and my brother got the collections of DVDs and watch his matches, and like I said, it is a typical match. It is him gets dominated, and the last minute of the match, he comes back, he goes his so-called Hulk up, and then it's over. You know, then the match is over. And if you look at John Cena, that's the same thing.